Hi guys, my name is Mike Waldron and I'm from Aylien. Just before I start, I'd like to thank RapidMiner for giving me the opportunity and giving Aylien the opportunity to present here today. It's a really interesting audience for us to present to, and you guys are right at the core of, I suppose, our community that we want to develop and our type of customers that we want to work with and our users we want to work with as well, so thanks for that. Just to give you a brief understanding of what we do at Aylien, we help developers and data scientists and anyone who wants to crunch data really get access to insights from unstructured data or content, so namely text and images. So we give you, I suppose, the smarts of natural language processing and machine learning through an API that's free for anyone to use up to a certain level. And that's the only corporate slide I'm gonna or the only pitch I'm gonna do, so I won't bore you with all Aylien details. We'll just dive into kind of what we're gonna talk about today. So we all hear a lot about big data today, and some of us cringe at the topic. Some of us talk about that's not big data. A lot of people don't know what they're talking about. But at the end of the day, it's an interesting topic, and it's hot right now, I suppose. And just to, even if we look at the digital landscape or the digital universe, whatever you want to call it, there's just a colossal amount of information out there that oftentimes we're kind of disregarding or not getting access to. So even some interesting stats that I saw, the digital universe as a whole today is at about 3.8 zettabytes. I think 1 zettabyte, maybe someone can correct me, but I think that's about 1 billion terabytes. So that gives you an understanding for the size of the amount of data out there. Another interesting one was Facebook just originally, or last week, I think they had their first 1 billion day where they had 1 billion users logged into Facebook at the one time, which is a pretty interesting point for them. But if you just think about the different data points that are going on there, and to get access to that is extremely useful for, say, a data scientist. The other thing we're looking at, and even though Twitter is probably going through a strange time at the moment where they don't have as many active users as they want and that kind of thing, and people are thinking it's a dying platform, there's still 400 million tweets coming out of Twitter each day. So another interesting one actually I saw was that from Condé Nast. It's a bit more of a marketing quote rather than a data science quote, but basically they said that there was more content uploaded yesterday than any one human can ever consume in their entire lifetime, just down to the actual size of the amount of information out there. So that's my first meme, or a token meme. There's two reasons why I have that. So the first is I heard a while ago that if you're doing a tech presentation, you should have three things. You should have a meme, so a token meme thrown in there. That's one. You should mention big data as much as possible, or at least 3 times. So I've done that. And the last one is you should have a cat or a picture of a cat, preferably a lol cat, but I don't actually have that. So 2 out of 3 ain't too bad. But the real reason I have this up there is, yeah, that's great. All that information is out there, and it's so helpful. But the real challenge is a lot of this information is unstructured content. It's not in a database. We can't reference it easily. And another quote I saw, that unstructured data in the enterprise accounts for, and I've heard 2 different quotes on this, but it's between 80 and 90% of enterprise data is unstructured data. So like I said, that's information like, it could be email when you're talking about an enterprise, it could be Slack chats or Yammer chats, it could be anything in documents that isn't structured or in a database that you can reference easily. So there's a lot of problems with all this information that's being created. The main thing is it's user generated, so it's like Instagram posts, images, it's tweets, it's Facebook comments, it's emails, Slack chats, anything like that. But the main problem with that is it doesn't have, say, a standard format, or it doesn't have certain protocols or schemas around it that make it easier to ingest and understand. So they're the main problems with it, or the cons with analyzing this type of information. It's unstructured, it's subjective, so it's just somebody's opinion. It can be biased, it can be very noisy and spammy, and there's just a hell of a lot of it, so getting a handle on it is quite difficult. It's getting easier these days with compute power being more accessible, cheaper and everything, and obviously through platforms like RapidMiner. The pros, subjectiveness of it is actually a pro as well, because you can get right into the opinion of, say, users of your product. It's more honest. You know, if you think of back in the day, people would do focus groups to learn about products, and you know, you'd be sitting in a room with somebody peering over your shoulder as you critique a product. That's not real. You know, you get really down to true insight when you look at social media and reviews and that kind of information. The other thing is it's somewhat real time. You can stay on top of trends easier, and it's somewhat accessible. It is accessible if you have money to pay for, you know, access to the Twitter fire hose, access to Facebook data, that kind of thing. So even if we take one tweet, for example, so even in that tweet, say less than 140 characters, and this one in particular, we can still glean a lot of information from this. And the other thing to note as well is this information is all very easy for, say, a human to understand, but not at scale. So they can't keep up with the amount of information that's being created all the time. So even in this case, we can see from that one tweet, we've got mention of Facebook, we've got the negative tones, we know it's subjective, we've got particular aspects, you know, I think it's useless and it's actually about the Messenger app. So we've got a mention of a product, and we can tell that the language is English and informal. So that's a fair amount of insight from just that one piece of text. So I'm going to dive into a bit more about kind of what we did with Twitter and why we chose the World Cup and kind of what we set out to prove. But to be really honest about it, we didn't know what we set out to prove. We kind of just saw the opportunity to collect a large amount of data and see what would happen, basically. So we knew that the FIFA World Cup was going to be hot on Twitter. We knew there would have been a lot of chatter about it. It was a global interest, so it spread globally, different languages, and that ran through. There was 3 billion Facebook interactions. Maybe we should have analyzed that as well, but we can do that next time. And there was 672 million tweets throughout the time frame that we analyzed it. So that was the other thing about it. It was a set time frame, so there was a start and finish, which made it a little bit easier to narrow down our focus and keep a focus on that particular event. So our approach, I'm going to split this into kind of three different areas. The approach we took, some of the challenges that we were faced with, and observations as well. So I'll talk about them now. The tools that we used as part of the process, RapidMiner was right at the core of it. We also used the Twitter streaming API, and then just to visualize the data, because we were posting this on a blog and trying to get some PR from it, we used some nice visualizations we done in Tableau. So it's good to hear as well that, you know, that integration with RapidMiner and Tableau is on the way, which I think will be, you know, utilized by a lot of people, especially us as well. So some of the observations and visualizations, we kind of split our analysis into two sections, one being the sentiment analysis, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the other was kind of tweets over time, and really what we were looking for was correlations and trends in, let's say, you know, certain events throughout the tournament, but certain events throughout a match, and certain events related to certain players and teams that we could maybe track on Twitter. First thing that we noticed was football is popular. We knew that anyway, but there's a massive global spread on where the activity was coming from. Some of the ones that kind of surprised me a bit was the lack of activity in some of the, you know, African nations, and maybe down around APAC region, down around Australia, New Zealand. But as you'd expect, it was concentrated around the Americas, and especially Europe. The other thing was the tweets by language. The majority of the tweets, over 50%, were in English, which suited us nicely. But also there was a lot of tweets in Spanish, which covered a few different countries, obviously, and Portuguese was probably third. So if you think about Brazil in that case as well. So for anyone who didn't know, Germany reigned supreme and came out on top. So they obviously had an excellent World Cup. And I'll show you in the next slide, but we have a nice visualization of Germany's, let's say, activity through the tournament and how that developed on Twitter as well. So one of the key things to note here, I just love this visualization because it's so, it's really got the German efficiency built into it. It's just a nice graph up and to the right. You can see that their first tournament gathered a bit of momentum, their first win of the tournament gathered a bit of momentum, more again after the third game. Not so much around the 4-0, people maybe thought that, that was a given, it was an easy win. And getting right above the top, defeating Brazil and qualifying for the final, we were pushing, huge tweets or volume of tweets, and when they actually won the World Cup. So first thing we noticed is that the activity on Twitter, it's pretty basic, but the activity on Twitter followed Germany's process through the tournament really nicely. And that was evident as well with regard to Brazil's nightmare of a tournament, let's say. So the Portuguese tweets started out, fairly high volumes. They beat Croatia 3-1. Then they took a hammering from Germany, I think. Was it here?
Cameron was 7-1, close to the end.
Yeah, that's down here. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's at the end. We'll talk about that again. But yeah, you can see that they started to gain a bit of momentum, especially on Twitter, and got more followers and more people tweeting about them. And we'll talk a bit more about how the sentiment of that activity on Twitter changed as well. So this is just the volume. So one of the things here, even though there's a lot of volume here, it was actually in relation to them not winning. It was a shocking defeat from Germany. We also broke it down per game. So this is probably one of the more interesting ones. And this is just a count of tweets throughout the game. So here we can see the first spike when Müller scored, and two very, I suppose, intense spikes when Kroos got two more goals. You could argue that maybe Germany and even the Brazilians lost interest in the game as the game went on, because we saw that the volume decreased quite dramatically. But I'd probably argue that was because this happened so quick and happened, and it was a bit of a shock to the system. There was a slight spike again once Brazil got a consolation goal, but not much in that. So some of the challenges that we faced with were mainly around access to the data. So unless you've got access to the fire hose, you only get about, I think it's anywhere between 10%. We're unsure as how much information you actually get access to on Twitter. So that's one point. If you are analyzing tweets, if you can afford it, use the fire hose. It gives you a lot more access. And yeah, that was the main challenge around the volume of tweets. The other thing was cleaning up some of the data. So there's a lot of retweets in there that you need to take out. There's a lot of spam. Spammers will jump on the back of a good hashtag that have nothing to do with the tournament, let's say, and they need to be stripped out as well. So then going into the sentiment analysis portion, we took a fairly simple approach in this case to the sentiment. Now I'm not entirely technical, but I'll do my best to, I suppose, explain how we approached it. We built a pretty simple model based on the first step was first creating a bag of words model around the tweets, extracting different features, so for unigrams, bigrams, and n-grams from each tweet. And we also used an open source tool as a second voter to validate some of our results. So it turned out to be kind of on par with other sentiment tools out there, and we were really doing this kind of as an experimentation. And there's probably some inaccuracy, probably about anywhere between 15 to 25%. And that's one of the main problems with sentiment. It's a very hard problem, and I'll just jump into that for a second here. It's a very hard problem. There's a lot of ambiguity around what people are saying when you're trying to pull out the sentiment. So here's a good example of two different tweets that both mention sick. So in this case, Jasmine says, I want to get myself an iPhone 6, then things is sick, which is actually a positive tweet. And she's bigging up the iPhone 6, saying, you know, I want one. The other one is, my iPhone is sick and I'm too broke to fix it. That's probably a negative tweet, but how does a machine, it's pretty easy for a human to understand that, but how does a machine get around that issue? And that's one of the major challenges with sentiment. So if we just jump back, sorry for doing this. The first thing that we did with sentiment was tracked the polarity of tweets throughout the whole tournament as well, but this was one of the more interesting points. It was based around that particular game, Brazil's journey throughout the tournament. So you can see here that there's very little negativity around the tweets that are mentioning Brazil. And there's a big spike in positivity leading up to their first couple of matches. Even when they win their first match here in a close game against Chile, a bit of negativity starts to creep in, and you can just see it getting worse as they progress through the tournament, especially around the loss to Germany and conceding 7 goals. And it gets right down to the bottom here at the end of the tournament when they eventually lose to the Netherlands, I think in the third place playoff. We also tracked one of Brazil's games against the Netherlands to see, within the game how the sentiment changed over time, just during that period. And in this case, it started out, people were pretty positive, maybe, willing to forgive the Brazilian team for what had happened before it, but the negativity soon raised its head again, and the polarity dropped right down once the Netherlands went 1-0 up, and it struggled to recover to the level it was at in the beginning. And on the contrary to that, once the Netherlands started to take the lead, you could see their polarity increase quite significantly. So, before I go on to that, but I suppose you know now I've ruined it, but there was another major event that happened throughout the World Cup, and that was Luis Suarez bit one of the Italian defenders. And we saw a massive spike in just activity around Twitter, especially tweets that were mentioning Suarez and mentioning this actual event. We created a really nice visualization mainly based around the Suarez biting scandal. So as you can see, the start of the tournament, everybody loves Suarez, he's great, he's a great player. But as it develops, you see some spike in the polarity or the negativity that's creeping in there, but it drops right down in a massive spike when he allegedly bit Giorgio Chiellini. He stayed negative for probably 5 days or so, where there was just a huge amount of activity, people giving out, what are they going to do? Are they going to ban him? What should they do? But he actually did a pretty good job, and he can probably credit his PR team in turning things around for himself. So right here, when he issued an apology on that date, he moved way back up into, I suppose, positive polarity again. And then once he actually signed with Barcelona again, it seems people forgot about everything that happened and were right behind him again. So some of the key things that we noted here was it's interesting to follow not just the volume of tweets throughout certain events, and they actually are related and trend really nicely together, but the sentiment is also very interesting and can change pretty quickly. And the other thing is we noticed that people are pretty fickle because they go from absolutely hating him to him being on top of the world once he signs for Barcelona, let's say. That also kind of ran through we picked, say, a number of, say, high-profile players, and ran the sentiment analysis on tweets that mentioned them as well. Neymar was probably highest in the positive section, and as you'd expect, Suarez had the most negative tweets about him. Some of the guys in the middle here is people you'd respect, like Robin, Van Persie, Rodriguez, and Messi, of course. Again, the challenges around that, I spoke a little bit about the sentiment already, and why that's hard and why it's difficult to, take out the ambiguity, the slang, even emojis, for example. They can have a whole other weighting on analyzing tweets or analyzing just social content or data in particular. So one thing we noticed was at the time that it was great. We love using RapidMiner, and it was fantastic using RapidMiner to crunch all this information and get it into a platform that we could work with it. But then we thought, some of the RapidMiner users could definitely use our smarts around, say, the text analysis side of things. So not just processing text and removing stop words, that kind of thing, but getting a bit more deeper into it. So we can help with, for example, entity extraction, so pulling out names of people, places, concepts. We do a classification, so that's kind of classifying whether an article or a tweet is about sport, but not just sports, so sport and soccer or sport and hockey, for example. So it's a two-tier classification. And of course we do sentiment as well. So I'm happy as well to announce that from hopefully next week, with help from the RapidMiner guys as well, we're currently working on an extension that will be available in the marketplace. So get out there and download it, start using it. As I said, you can use it for free up to 1,000 calls a day. So that's a lot of data if you want to at least just test the API and test what it can do, for example. So here's just kind of a quick insight into how it will work. And it's really simple, and it brings, I suppose, the smarts of text analysis to RapidMiner really easily. As you can see, in this case, we've just set up a Twitter stream, it's just a search API operator and the Aylien operator. So you can build your search in Twitter and then add one of the endpoints through an operator in RapidMiner. In this case, we're using sentiment. It's hard to see there, but this is an example of some of the results that you might get. That's probably very difficult for you guys to read as well, but I've highlighted one of the tweets that's basically a positive tweet we pulled in using the search API. We give you a score of the polarity and whether it's subjective or objective. That's the other thing I probably forgot to mention as well. A lot of the tweets that you'll analyze if you are approaching a problem like this is they'll be either subjective or objective. So either someone's opinion, or they'll just be a news headline or something where it doesn't add any value really or around opinion. And they're ones that you want to strip out as well and leave out of your sentiment analysis, let's say. You can do some nice visualizations, as you guys probably know, being RapidMiner experts within RapidMiner, but I'm really excited about the Tableau and ClickView integrations as well, just to kind of pretty that data up as well. But that's probably just because I'm more on the marketing side than technical, but I'll take that. We also did some, just playing around with the extension as well, we did some nice correlation analysis around what were the positive words, or what were the words that were used in a positive context within those positive tweets. So you can do some nice work, obviously you guys know, within RapidMiner in that instance as well. So that kind of takes me to the key takeaways. I was told as well that you should have mainly 3 or 4 key takeaways from a presentation. The first one being, we should do everything we can to try and get access to, I suppose, the unstructured gold mine that's out there as well. There's a lot of information hidden in blogs, forums, reviews, Facebook comments, tweets that is somewhat underutilized. I know there's a big push around it these days to start to use it for brand awareness, even in research purposes as well. But I think platforms like RapidMiner and hopefully our API make it a lot easier to start to make sense of that information. The other key takeaway is as well that, and we hear this as well from customers all the time, is social media is pretty much the new survey or focus group. That's where brands find out, what do people like about our brand? Is there something that we should be aware of that could cause a crisis for us? Access to Facebook and Twitter and mining that information can predict that for them. As I mentioned, platforms like RapidMiner make it a lot easier for people like me as well, who's not a coder, to get access to this type of information and to mine this data. And the last one is the RapidMiner extension will go live next week, hopefully. So hopefully there'll be some announcements around that as well, so you guys can obviously go ahead and download it as well. And there's a bonus takeaway as well, just around Luis Suarez. You don't want to get caught beside him in the box, especially before lunchtime. So that's pretty much it.